Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Stewart Gandolf. Welcome to 8 Primary Care Telehealth Strategies to Increase Daily Patient Visits and Grow Your Revenue. I'm Stewart. I'm CEO of Healthcare Success. We're a marketing agency and have been working in the healthcare space for about 20 years. And my colleague and cohort and co-host today is Jessica Neyer. Jessica is the Vice President of Strategy for Mend, leading telehealth, integrated telehealth platform provider. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you. You can call me Neyer, by the way, whatever you want.
Yeah, Neyer. Well, that sounds good. Awesome. All right, next slide, please. Oh, before I get into this, I do want to mention one thing. Number one, keep in mind that we will be recording the webinar. And so everybody who's registered and attended will be receiving a link to the recording and slides after the webinar is over, probably about a few hours later. Secondarily, we will be having a Q&A section. And so feel free to text questions during the meeting using your chat box over there. One of our colleagues will be handling the sort of housekeeping kinds of chats that you may have during the session. And then Jess and I will be walking through the Q&A section with you at the end. But before we get there, here's our agenda today. We're going to be, first of all, talking about what's going on in telehealth today. Things are changing, as you know. Our world changes so crazy fast these days. So we'll be talking about the latest, and there's some misperceptions out there about what's happening and not happening with telehealth. So we'll be sharing some data. Those of you that have seen me speak before know, or heard me speak before, know that I love data. And so we're providing some credible information on that front. I'll be talking also about some of the common primary care objectives we see over and over and over again. And then Jess will be leading the section about the 8 strategies. And Jess has got some terrific real world insights about how to integrate these platforms into your practice in a best practices manner. And then finally, we'll be talking about some the best practices. So without further ado, let's get started. So in terms of the telehealth update, next slide. This is amazing. If you think back about, pre-pandemic, where was telehealth on the curve, the adoption curve? And what's really intriguing to me is this data is so great to look at. About 2/3 of patients felt hesitant or doubtful about, the quality they could receive by telemedicine. And then now today, of course, 87, almost 89% want to continue to use telehealth for non-urgent consultations. And that is huge. And so what's really interesting is a couple things. Number one, there are providers out there still that just sort of can't wait for pandemic to be over and going back to the old way. Not as many, because a lot of providers love this too, as we'll see, but there are people like that. And what's interesting is that it's just a consumer demand. It's table stakes as we move into the future. Patients want this. And we'll talk about being healthcare consumers a lot during this meeting, or at least certainly again. And patients are healthcare consumers. Also, what's intriguing is Jess and I are exactly opposite on this one. Yep. Pre-pandemic, I was an early adopter. I've been using telehealth now for probably 3 or 4 years. I loved it. I've used it especially to refill scripts, or my kids need urgent care. I have lots of anecdotes I've talked about in the past, but Jess, you had a different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. This is me. I am the exact patient that you're saying. Prior to the pandemic, I never really utilized telehealth. I saw it mainly as something that was used maybe just in urgent care settings that I didn't need at the time. And that was it. And then the pandemic completely changed it. And I actually liken the experience to like an Uber. I didn't think I would use Uber ever. And then I tried it once and then I never went back. It's the same sort of thing with telehealth. I didn't use telehealth ever. I tried it once because I had to during the pandemic I have a routine visit with a neurologist actually. And he had to use telehealth at the time. We had no other option of seeing each other. And I was hooked. I no longer had to take time off of work to go see my doctor. I live in LA where there's crazy traffic. So no longer did I have to sit in an hour to go to Beverly Hills to see him, then pay for parking, sit in the waiting room for an hour, till I could see him for 10 minutes and then do the entire thing over again to go home. I could just see him for 30 minutes and that was it. It was an incredible experience. And now I'm at the point where I don't want to ever go back unless I actually have to be in person. Let's say I'm getting a shot, or, a provider has to put physical, touch involved into the visit. I just want to utilize telehealth for all specialties.
Yeah, I think it lets the patients taste that. They just don't want to go back. And that, our little anecdotes show that. And you just note what I would note if you're listening, beyond the data, just think about how emotional Jess was just about that. I mean, she's not saying vaguely, sort of, kind of, really might want to. No, I just don't want to go back. I never want to go back to the other way. And that's really important. So if we think about market demand, that's where we are today. Next slide. Another thing that comes up a lot, and Jess can add some color commentary to this as well. I've been doing this for so long, and I've been talking to providers of all shapes and sizes, large ones and super big ones and smaller ones too. And, again, having been an early adopter with telehealth, I'm like, to get a competitive advantage, telehealth will provide it. And oh my gosh, the objections I received, right? Well, and of course they were valid, right? HIPAA was a challenge and a concern, and it was difficult to work with the platforms. They weren't really ready yet. Reimbursement, will I get paid for this? And, so there was certainly reasons to have some friction there. But in addition to that, there was also just hesitancy on the organization's part. The provider didn't want to do it, and neither did the administration. And wow, it was an avalanche. There are hospitals and health systems I've talked to that previously had done, a dozen, maybe telehealth appointments a day, and suddenly started doing thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of visits a day. So they figured it out really, really fast. Now, granted, in the first couple of days, any platform was okay, and you didn't have to be perfect, it just had to happen. But as you would expect, things have been maturing greatly. So another thing that comes up in conversation, so everybody, I think, would agree that it just exploded. But then there's sort of the death, the rumors of the death are premature. There's a fair number of people saying, well, geez, this telehealth, has that passed? And the answer is no. Okay, obviously it's not going to be at the 80th percentile when pandemic eases, right? But if you look at the data here, it shows that 38 times the amount of usage for telehealth pre-pandemic is kind of where it's plateaued at. And Jess, I mean, you're talking to providers every day about telehealth. That's your area of specialty. What are you finding?
Absolutely. I think this graphic is actually perfect for this. So there's a lot of misunderstanding of telehealth, and across different industries too. I get this question all the time from providers and different industry leaders across different areas. They see the spike that happened with telehealth during the pandemic, and the immediate response is, well, it's nowhere near where it was at the height of the pandemic. Yeah, you're right. But are you looking at the difference between January prior to pandemic and what the utilization of telehealth was to now, February, where we're not at the height of the pandemic? It's different. It's coming into the norm. It's 38 times what it used to be still. So in no way is this going away. It's here to stay. We're just normalizing it and figuring out, okay, how do I work telehealth into my physical practice, which is a really big key we'll touch on later.
Awesome. The one other comment before we switch from this slide is just to mention that, certainly investment is now happening, right? The practices are investing in proper systems. And, we talked about the product a minute ago, which is, virtual healthcare is evolving really into more of an integrated model. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Again, just going back to data, we talked about provider acceptance. And so I'll, sort of highlight this for you. There's tons of data out there, by the way. And we curated this because there's just tons of really good data, and they all say essentially the same thing. I just picked two of the most respected providers out there, or the most respected sources rather, the AMA and Cleveland Clinic. So on the provider side, just some fun data to take a look at, that 68% of physicians said they were personally motivated to increase their use of telehealth. So 2/3, and getting 2/3 of doctors to do anything can be challenged, right? Ask them. So 2/3 wanted to increase their use. 73% used it for chronic management, chronic disease management, preventative care, lots of routine. Pretty much what Jess was saying a minute ago, anytime they can without actually seeing the patient live, seems to be a good opportunity. And then as well, just in terms of the administrative side of, assisting with scheduling, cancellation, rescheduling, those kinds of things. Meanwhile, the patients, again, just to highlight what we said before, 82% said the virtual visit was as good as in person. That's just, and I encourage you, because having worked with so many practices, especially as they get larger, because everybody seems to want to have a vote, that data can help, right? So if you're on the administrative side and you need to convince the providers, or if you're a provider that wants to convince your colleagues, either way, the data helps convince this. So feel free to share this information. 91% said the virtual visit made it easy to get the care they needed. They thought that their clinician was still interested in them. They said they felt comfortable with the technology. So one of the things too, going back to what Jess just said about the 30, well, it's not as big as it used to be. Another thing that I find is really problematic is a lot of times people say like, well, I had that senior that just couldn't get comfortable with the technology. And there's a tendency to throw babies out with bathwater because, really, let's talk about the other 95% who are comfortable. So I get that there's always, and I'm sure Jess can speak to that comfortable with technology because the platform matters, but it's really easy to make bad decisions on anecdotes without looking at data. Jess, any additional comments to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And we'll touch on this later. I think a big problem that I see across the board in telehealth is a lot of solutions that are out there still require the patient to download an app or use a certain password, or there's certain instructions in order to get in. And that's confusing, even for myself, who I'd like to think that I am, pretty tech savvy, having worked in health tech for the last, 10, 15 years, whatever it is now. I can't even keep track. Imagine you're a senior. That's difficult. It's not that they don't want to use telehealth. It doesn't actually work for them, right? So there has to be a solution that makes sense to their workflow. That's just easy and simple, because when that is available, hands down, they prefer telehealth. So it's actually interesting to see what their response is.
Yep, absolutely. Next slide, please. So some of the objectives we see, next slide, a lot. So again, I've been doing this for a while, and positive patient outcomes universally, everybody, I don't think I've ever met a provider that doesn't want their patients to do better, right? That's kind of the whole point. So that's universal, but it's more nuanced than that. That's not the only objective. So, as we know, healthcare has gotten more complex and providers have gotten larger over the years, and that is exploding now. I mean, suddenly now it's a norm to be working with 20, 50 location businesses, 100 or more. And so operations are, the more complex you get, the more complex it gets by a fact, it's a sort of square, not just doubling. Complexity really increases as you double in size or triple or whatever. Cost is always an issue, or reducing cost is something that was always a priority. Provider burnout, we hear a lot about burnout these days, working too hard, work-life balance, the whole COVID, every night I feel like I hear, providers on the news talking about what it's like to be a provider with COVID. It just seems never to end. So, that's a constant problem. And in fact, I just read an article from a good source about the states that are the most impacted right now are suffering shortages because people are tapping out. They're backing out of the game. So provider burnout's a real issue. Another thing that we talked about, and we'll talk about a little more, is making room in the schedule to effectively and efficiently increase daily visits and revenue. Patient experience, those of you that listen to my podcast or have seen me speak before know this is a passion of mine. Talk about this a lot, and not just from a business sense that it's great to have a good reputation and all those things, but really it's just the right thing to do, and consumers demand it. And then when we talk about the larger organizations, which we talk to a lot, the health systems or private equity-based programs or doctor-owned, groups that get larger and larger, scale becomes a big issue. And so we never heard about scale in healthcare 10 years ago, or at least not very often. Today, everybody's interested in, how do I scale that? How do I deliver that? I know you've got a magic physician that can do anything, but how do I scale that? How do I make that work? And then, of course, profitability, whether you're a nonprofit or a profit, for-profit, having revenue, helps a lot. So, and having a bottom line will help. So, Jess, I mean, you're talking to providers every day and administrators. Any other additional comments to this?
No, I think that's exactly it. So there's a reason why you went to med school, or providers went to med school, right? They deliver fantastic care and they're already doing that. We can trust that they're doing that. We just need to make sure we're utilizing technology to make their lives easier while still helping on the back end, helping with workflow, helping with increasing their revenue. So that's what we'll be talking about later in this webinar. Great.
Next slide. So one of the questions is, okay, Stewart, come on, really? Can technology really help with all that? I mean, come on. Well, the answer is a resounding yes. And in fact, as we'll talk about here, and I'm going to turn the ball over to Jess now, the integrated telehealth platform has just such a huge, opportunity. And again, this is the idea here is it's not just a tactic. This can help you optimize your practice, both in person and virtual. And that line, it's really, again, it's a combined delivery system. So yeah, Jess, let's go ahead and give it over to you.
All right. Perfect. Well, let's dig into it. Let's figure out the 8 primary care telehealth strategies you actually need to increase patient visits for your practice and grow revenue at the same time. So that's so important too. A lot of times we just think about telehealth as a video visit. It's exactly what you and I are doing today, utilizing very similar technology, but we're ignoring all of the other aspects that actually make it a scalable solution for, like Stewart just said, both your physical and your virtual practice. And we'll get into that in a second as you continue, and can really help with your bottom line at the end of the day. But in order to do that, you need to be doing a couple critical things when you analyze telehealth for your practice and what you're actually doing to implement it. So the first thing that most often I see gets overlooked is, does your telehealth solution integrate with your EHR? So I'm taking a wild guess here, but I think I know the answer. Most practices utilize an EHR today. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. And I liken it, not that on the business end, I have Salesforce. I have to use Salesforce for everything all day, every day. I hate it, but I use it. EHRs tend to be the same way. They're not the greatest necessarily, but every practice has to use it, right? That is where you're used to going day in and day out, and every member of your practice is used to going to it. You need a telehealth solution that speaks to what you're already doing. It speaks to your EHR. It can read information from it. So you don't have to do double work, right? By doing double work, although it seems like you're doing everything you need to do, you're actually wasting time, and time is money at the end of the day. So by utilizing something that already automatically integrates with your EHR, you can scale back the time that telehealth actually takes for your back-end office members or yourself, right? And use that revenue elsewhere. Next slide. All right, strategy number 2. So let's talk about the patient engagement piece, or the patient as a consumer. There's a lot of things they want to see, right? I think about myself selfishly. I'm a busy mom of a 3-year-old. I work full time. Maybe, and this actually happened yesterday, I had to schedule my daughter's 3-year-old appointment. And I remembered to do it at 6 o'clock. Guess what? 6 o'clock is not normal operating hours for a practice. So what happened? I only was able to call the practice because there's nothing online for me to schedule with them. I had to leave a message. I had to tell them my availability. And now I'm playing phone tag with the practice, and who knows when I'll actually schedule, right? So that's potential lost revenue for the practice, right? They're wasting time, not wasting time, but that's more time that goes by where I don't get onto the schedule and I'm not filling a void for them. You can solve all that by opening up scheduling to the patient. And there's ways to do that that still make sense for your workflow or allow you to regulate things on the back end. Maybe certain appointment types are able to schedule, maybe only certain availability is able to be scheduled by a patient. But it opens things up for that consumer like me who is trying to book an appointment, let's say at 8 o'clock at the end of their day when they just remember they need a visit for something, or they realize something's going wrong and need to see a provider. By opening it up, it allows you to get more patients into the fold and offer that convenience they're looking for.
So I want to add something to this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jess. This is another passion thing of mine. When I speak live, I often talk about what are the couple things that patients really want to do electronically with the provider. And the answer is to be able to communicate them with a secure method by email or some other secure method and schedule their own appointments. And then you ask the providers, what are the two things specifically they do not want them to do? Let them communicate directly by email and let them schedule their own appointment. And I just got to tell you again, from the consumer point of view, you mentioned this just a moment ago, Jess, about your own experience at 6 a.m. Look, we're busy people these days. I run a company. I work from typically 8:30 till about 10:30, often. And I don't have time. Like when I think about this, when I finally slow down, because I'm usually in meetings all day, when I finally have time to think about healthcare, it's usually about 6 o'clock at night because I've been on the race the whole day. And this happens over and over and over again. And I have my own anecdotes where I go back and forth with providers that I've left because I couldn't get anybody. I sent them an email saying, I know I don't have the secure link. Can you send me a secure link? No response. Can you please let me schedule online, or at least can we do this by email? And they call me back and leave me a message and it's just so frustrating from the patient's point of view. And then I finally call back during the day and it's like, oh, we're out for lunch.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that this is a huge issue that we see all the time. Not sure how that happened. I'm on airplane mode. Anyway, sorry about the interruption there. But that's really, it's a hot button for consumers, and especially the kinds of patients you want, right? The ones that, have good insurance and, are going to be good at complying. It's like, make their life easy. I just strongly suggest that.
That's such a great point. And I want to bring up two things you actually just mentioned. So number one, you mentioned if you need a reschedule, if something happens, if you need a link, you're trying to message the practice and going back and forth. That actually goes hand in hand with the rescheduling, right? You need to give patients the flexibility to reschedule an appointment if something comes up, right? This happens all the time. Something happens, something gets scheduled, maybe they have an important meeting they have to attend, whatever it is, and they need to reschedule their appointment and they need a convenient way to reschedule it. If you have to call the practice to reschedule, maybe you don't get through, maybe you leave a message, maybe no one hears the message, there's human error involved in that. And so that's what actually leads to a lot of no-shows. And we know that's a huge problem in healthcare today, is no-shows, right? That wasted time on a provider's calendar means money at the end of the day. That's time you can be spending doing something else that is generating revenue for you, or is checking a box on something you legally have to do, or seeing another patient, right? You can utilize that time, somewhere else. The other thing I really want to say, actually 2 points. The other thing in regards to what Stewart mentioned was providers are often fearful of giving patients the ability to schedule themselves. And I want to be really clear. By giving patients the ability to schedule themselves, it doesn't mean they have full control of your calendar. The provider still has control. If integrated, and this goes back to the the last slide, your system should be able to read your availability on your calendar in your EHR. So it should see when you're taking appointments for a certain appointment type, when you're open, when you're not, when you're already busy, when you have things blocked off, right? Maybe you only want to make certain timeframes available for patients to be able to schedule. Maybe you want to set it up in such a way where patients can request an appointment, but you still have to confirm it on the back end. You need something that is flexible to how you actually practice at the end of the day. So it is doable. I would just caution you, don't be fearful, embrace it. It's something that will really help. The third thing I wanted to point out is I know this slide just mentions the ability to self-schedule, or no, actually, I'll mention this on the next slide. Never mind.
Love
Keep
it.
going. All right, this is where I wanted to mention it. But the next thing is, in addition to, if you think about the patient journey, the first step is allowing them to schedule an appointment. The second thing, once it's scheduled, is send them appointment reminders. You want to make sure they come in for their visit. You can't just expect them to show up. So you need confirmations to be sent to them. You need regular confirmations to be sent to them. You need easy access to the appointment itself to be sent to them. You don't need these crazy instructions, or you need to, hire a staff. I'm sure some of you can empathize with this, hiring staff members, and all they do all day long is call patients to say, you have an upcoming appointment. This is how you log into your telehealth. Make sure you go here, download this app. That's a waste of time and money and resources that could all be spent elsewhere if you automate the appointment reminder process for the patients and give them access through those appointment reminders that they can easily log into. The second thing that I want to mention here that we don't necessarily call out is with digital forms. Once you send an appointment reminder out, you also need to back that up with forms. So the beauty of telehealth is patients don't need to go into a brick and mortar location anymore, right? They can see you at the comfort of their own home, but you still have requirements that you had when the patient was physically in front of you. You need certain information, you need certain documents, you need certain signatures, and you need a way to get that from the patient. So, am I, as the patient, going to go to your website and click a link and download forms and print it out and send it back to you once I've, filled it out and somehow figure out how to fax it because I don't have a fax in my home? Probably not. But if there was a way to digitize that and send me the forms via text or email or whatever is ahead of time, along with those appointment reminders, that hands down makes it an incredible experience for the patients and gets you the information that you need as the provider. Streamlines the whole process. Going back to appointment reminders too, I want to say one other thing. A lot of times people hear appointment reminders and think, yeah, that's a commodity at this point. We have that. Do you though? Really think about it. A lot of times appointment reminders are just sent maybe through email, through an EHR, whatever it is. But not many people check their email, but we're all on our phones. I'm telling you, it's 2 inches away from me right now. It's never far away. So if I get a text message with an appointment reminder, I am more likely to respond to it. But that's me, right? That's a different generation. Talking about an elder population, like we mentioned before, a lot of times they don't have text or email. So you need to be able to have a solution that's smart enough to recognize what type of phone is it on file and let me contact the patient appropriately. So is that text? Is it a phone message? What are they most likely to respond to? And be able to adapt based off of that patient to get them through the door. All right, next slide. Okay, this one is really, really unique, but you want a system that's smart enough once you send those appointment reminders to read the information in your EHR to figure out, okay, how likely is this patient to come into the practice? Like I mentioned before, no-shows are a huge, huge issue in healthcare. They always have been, right? Every time a patient doesn't come into the practice, which I guarantee everyone on this call has experienced probably this week, it's lost time and lost money for the practice at the end of the day. And you could be spending that time elsewhere. So you need a system that is smart enough to see, okay, what is the likelihood based off of previous information for that patient to come in, right? And then adapts the appointment reminders on the last screen to send messages that are more specific to that patient to get them into the fold. And if they don't, right, not to the point of no showing, but if they If it's smart enough and can read it, the idea is you need a solution that allows the patient to reschedule or cancel. So you can identify that time ahead of the appointment and then do something else with it. So it's whether you want to schedule other appointments, utilize that time differently, actually get money, or, use that time to fill in paperwork or patient charts or whatever you have to do. It's not lost time at the end of the day. Below, we just have a couple examples of the types of information that a good solid system will be able to read to then predict what kind of information is out there. So Men does do it. We look at appointment details, when the appointment is, the time of year, time of day, all of that. How likely are they to come in based off of the appointment type, the patient's previous engagement history, and then utilizes that information to customize messages to go out to them and to actually get the patient into your practice, or not maybe into your practice or in telehealth, just seeing them virtually. All right. We've kind of been saying this. I'll touch on the patient satisfaction side first and then really go into improving access. This is just an incredible way, if done correctly, if you jump through all those hoops for actually figuring out what the patient journey looks like, getting into the telehealth visit itself. By increasing patient satisfaction, you increase the likelihood of them coming back to your practice, right? They've had such an incredible experience with you up until that point. They want to continue doing it. And we know the more times you see a patient, that's more revenue for you at the end of the day. Just looking at the revenue side, not the actual patient, compliance and satisfaction side. But you're improving access for the patient. We'll get into the provider side in a second, but you're improving access for that patient. You can see more patients, right? You don't have to spend the time, you have to budget 20 minutes for the patient to be in your waiting room, 15 minutes for charting, whatever it looks like for you. Instead, you could line it up differently and see more patients in a shorter amount of time, depending on your needs as a practice, which increases revenue as well. The other thing to really focus on is getting patients in faster. By being able to see more patients, not decreasing the quality of care for the patients, but by being able to see more patients, you can get them into your practice to be seen by you faster. The average wait time for most appointments is 2 to 4 weeks for primary care. And as a patient, waiting a month to actually be seen by your primary care provider is oftentimes really hard. And when you can't be seen for a significant amount of time, what happens is the patient, we're consumers, so we go elsewhere. We find another doctor that we can see faster, right? And that's lost revenue. That's a lost patient for the practice when they could have gotten them in if they were utilizing something like telehealth.
Jess, I want to just add on this point because, as working as a marketing agency, oftentimes our mission is to generate patients for a practice and new patients for a practice. And this is such a huge issue. The entire onboarding phone process is a topic for another day. And there's lots of facets to it. But one of the many things that really matters is exactly this, like how quickly can you get them in? One of the things we find is, especially if they're a new patient, people who have a chant, patients have less patience. Hey, that sort of works, duration. But they really do. New patients are not as patient as your current patients. They are going to be a lot more like, I wanted something fast. Why? Not because they're bad patients, because they have no relationship with you. They don't understand the difference and why I should wait. So the challenge is that, first of all, this can be a really big problem you never see, because usually the staff won't tell you that patients just aren't booking. And then even if they do book, oftentimes they won't show. So what'll happen is they'll book you and then they'll say, well, let me try to find something else. In other words, it's kind of like you go to a restaurant, you book a table and you're still trying to find a better one, but at least you have a backup plan. And then of course, they forget to call you back and do the courtesy of canceling. So these are really, really big issues. So on one side with new patients, you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to get new patients. And that's their first experience with you. It's already inconvenient. So that's the first experience they have. And then the second part of it is, then in terms of your current patients, you're not giving the satisfaction they would like. So, we all have anecdotes. I just had a physical where I had to wait, weeks on this. And, obviously a physical you can't do by telehealth, but there's lots of routine things that you can do. And that just helps free up the schedule. So the ones that need to be in person, you'll have more time for. So anyway, this is a big deal, Jess, in my experience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Sort of along the same lines, telehealth not only allows you to see more patients, it allows you to see more patients in different areas. So typically how it works with a brick and mortar location, when you really do the market research, you're seeing your patients, and maybe this is different in certain, niche specialties, but most patients aren't traveling more than a 30-mile radius of your practice. So you're sort of confined to your location. With telehealth, it expands your reach. I, as a patient, actually just saw a provider last week in San Francisco, and I'm in Los Angeles. So that's about a 7-hour difference by car. So any other time, physically, I would never, ever see that provider. But with telehealth, I was able to. It wasn't a problem at all. So really, that's a way to utilize it as well. So not only does it allow you to expand your reach significantly within reason, you have to make sure it's still, like Stewart said before, follows the guidelines of certifications, which are a little different by state and by specialty, but getting much better. The other aspect of it is it allows you to touch patients that don't have access to a car, that are in rural locations, that it's harder to get into a physical location. You can now see them if you have a service like telehealth available to you. The really, really important thing that I really want to touch on is, especially in rural areas, being so remote also means that they don't have great internet access or bandwidth. So you need a solution that can operate on very strong bandwidth and then next to nothing, right? Really runs the gambit to make sure patients across the board are able to be seen by you. The other thing too is, and this is kind of stretching the topic, but it really goes hand in hand with it. Telehealth, if done correctly, expands the types of patients. So not only where they are, right, which we talked about before, but also, let's say I am an English speaking physician and I don't know Korean, but I have a Korean patient. If you utilize a service that has translation as well, you can not only increase the geography that you're able to see a patient within, but you can increase the types of patients you're able to see. You can now speak to them in a different way and have that translation service available to you. And just a quick note, we have translation into 240 different languages on the MED platform. So make sure, no matter what platform it is, that you are utilizing translation services. All right, so I'll touch on the patient side and then the provider side for this. Telehealth allows you to expand your hours and therefore the convenience of your services to patients. So like we mentioned before, over and over and over, most practices are only open 9 to 5. That doesn't work for a lot of patients. And especially in today's society, when most people are working from home, there's a new norm, and you're expected to be in front of your computer all the time, all day long. So it's harder actually to get away. And so they can't go to an appointment at 3 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever it is. And again, I am the perfect example of it. It's really hard for me to break away. at a certain hour. So it allows you, depending on what you'd like for your practice and what works for your schedule, to either increase your hours or change your hours, or maybe be available at times where you wouldn't ordinarily be available. Because it also gives the convenience of, you as the provider could be anywhere. You could be at home seeing patients. So maybe the same requirements that would have you come into a practice that's 30 minutes away, where you have to be there an hour early, would just take up too much time if you wanted to expand your hours till 7 or open for a couple hours on Saturday or whatever it was. By offering telehealth and just being able to turn it on, it changes the game significantly. And by having that as the patient, hands down, if that was available to me, I'm going to that provider, because that's so much easier for me and my schedule. So it's really convenient for the patient. I do want to caveat that by saying, we do not expect providers to work 24 hours a day. In no way are we saying that. Provider burnout is a huge, huge, huge issue across the board in healthcare. And we want to make sure it's known telehealth is something that can actually help with that, right? By offering convenience, by fitting into your schedule and your location as the provider or as the practice, it really just opens up doors to be that much more convenient for you on the clinician side as well. All right, next slide. All right, last but not least, you really want to embrace all of the opportunities that your telehealth platform can provide. So what I mean by that really, and I won't go into crazy detail here, but you don't want a solution that's just point, video solutions. That's something more than what you and I are offering today. You need something that really focuses on everything we just talked about, the incomplete patient journey, the complete workflow aspect for your practice that makes your life easier, that seamlessly goes between the physical and virtual side of your practice, so you can go back and forth if you'd like to. Stewart mentioned it before, especially if you're a part of a larger organization. If you have 2 or more locations, you're dealing with a lot of people and a lot of process. It's hard for all of that to be manual and to be done well. So you need a seamless solution that automates that for you and improves the experience for everybody involved, both patient, practice, and office.
Very good. And Jess, one thing that I want to highlight here, we talked about this a little bit, but I just want to reiterate it. We talked about a lot of tactics today, lots of, details on how this works. And you did a fantastic job of covering, very detailed, great job on all that. And so but I want to make sure that as we get close to the Q&A here in just a moment, that we remember that this is a fundamental change. This is not a minor change. So, we talk about, those of us that remember marketing class from way back when, there are 4 P's of marketing class, or price, or marketing rather, or price, place, product, or promotion. And the most important one out of those 4 P's is the product, right? What is the product? And I would argue that telehealth today, given that it's 30 to 40% adoption of patient visits broadly, is a fundamental change to your product. And so I would be thinking about this much more strategically. Certainly on this call, we probably have lots of operators that are in charge of operations for the practice. We probably have a bunch of providers. But for those of you that are leading the organization, this is a fundamental change for where the business is going, where medicine and private practice is going. So I just feel like that's such an important thing. This is a strategic decision, not just a tactical operational issue.
Absolutely.
So as we wind up here, I think there's one more slide, or are we just in the Q&A?
There's 1 or 2. This is really summarizing everything that we just talked about. So what are the different things that you need to think about? You need to be able to manage the patient experience, the patient journey, make the appointment reminder to form, to integration with your EHR, to actually seeing the patient, to making the waiting room similar to what they would experience in your office, so they're not staring at a blank screen, to being able to have triaging or different aspects of the actual visit itself involved in your telehealth. So you can mimic your physical side, and so much more. So there really are a lot of factors to consider in it, but you need to make sure you're not utilizing 10 different solutions in order to make that happen, which can very easily be done. That's really expensive, really time consuming, and just awful to manage. So really be on the look for a single solution that takes care of all of it for you.
Outstanding. And then the last slide, I think we're going to do a Q&A. So this would be a great time to start sending or through the chat your questions. We've already got a bunch of questions here that are coming in, but we have time for more questions. So Jess, how about a 30-second commercial about men specifically before we get into the Q&A?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to, and I'll try to keep it to 30 seconds. The short story is we are the end-to-end platform that takes care of a couple different aspects. The complete patient journey, everything they need to have a great telehealth experience with a provider, the complete back end, right? So not just the patient experience, but what is the workflow for the provider? What is the workflow for the practice? How do they seamlessly integrate, their workflows into their telehealth solution, and then weaves the physical and the virtual. So we're realistic as a platform. We realize you're not going to do 100% of telehealth visits and that's it. You're most likely going to go between telehealth and physical. And you need to be able to have a platform that works with both. And that's what we do. So this is just a quick glimpse, and we can go into a lot more detail. We are a customizable solution. We offer a HIPAA compliant platform, really advanced telehealth features, but some of those things beyond telehealth, like I mentioned, we have the enhanced virtual waiting room, which is a Netflix-like library of engaging content. So the patient doesn't just have to sit for an average of 21 minutes staring at a blank screen. All the triaging cues, digital appointment reminders via phone, text, and email, digital forms that are customized based off of what you need, the ability to do payment capture, messaging. We have dialer functionality. So the provider doesn't actually have to give their email, their phone number at the end of the day. Translation services, patient scheduling, everything is covered based off of what you actually need in your practice. That was it. Stewart, did I do decently? For 30
Pretty good. Really good. It's a lot.
Okay.
I know 30 seconds wasn't fair, but you did a great job. All right. So I think we have the Q&A section. That's great. Jess, I'll be asking you these questions, Jess. I think so far they're all for you. So not surprisingly. So the first question was that you were mentioning EHRs before, and somebody asked about which EHRs do you guys integrate with?
Oh gosh, we integrate with essentially everything. One of the beauties of us is we are fully customizable, and we really put an emphasis on service and our capabilities. So even if you come to us with an obscure EMR we've never integrated with, we will figure out a way to extract information. So wouldn't limit that. We do integrate with mostly all EHRs, definitely all of the major EHRs out there, and even a lot of the little smaller, more obscure EHRs as well.
Very good. Excellent. Another question that came in is, can group telehealth sessions be secure and HIPAA compliant?
Yeah, they absolutely can. So you need a solution. It kind of goes back to the platform, right? You need to make sure you're doing your homework and that it is taking place in a secure HIPAA compliant environment and on a secure and HIPAA compliant platform. It kind of doesn't matter how many customers necessarily, or patients, I should say. I say customers because patients are consumers. How many patients you are seeing, as long as you're utilizing the appropriate technology for what you need. So it's really important that you're not just using FaceTime, right? That's not HIPAA compliant, but you need a platform that is.
So that's actually led me into a couple other questions we just had. So one is, I mentioned about the HIPAA compliance. Well, actually, I'll cover the first one was about, you mentioned FaceTime, but what makes, men different from Zoom, FaceTime, Teams, those kinds of platforms?
I get this question all the time. So a lot of people, it's really interesting. A lot of practices, because of the pandemic, just had to adopt something really quickly for telehealth. So they just adopted Zoom, a FaceTime, a Microsoft Teams, something like that, which really, look, we're using Zoom right now. Zoom for healthcare is not very different than what we're utilizing. It's not built for the provider. The difference between that and what we do is we've been doing this for 6 years, so way beyond the pandemic. So we really understand the practice and what needs they have, and how to actually incorporate this into their workflow. So a couple of the big differences. Number one, we handle the entire patient journey according to what you want, but we have the capabilities to manage everything across the board based off of what we found works best for both you and the patient. Number two, a big difference is we are customizable depending on, the package that you get, but a lot of times with telehealth services, what you see is what you get. And that doesn't actually work with your practice and your needs and your workflow. So that's a huge difference. And number three, the biggest difference I would say is a lot of solutions are just telehealth and that's it. They don't allow you to seamlessly go between your physical and your virtual side of your practice. And that's what you need in order to make this scalable, because as we've seen, telehealth is here to stay. So how do you actually make it work in your practice? And that's where Men comes in and really fills the gap.
Excellent. We've got 2 more questions so far, and this is your, so we've got a couple more questions. If you have any other additional questions, please send them in now. The one question we had going back to HIPAA compliant was, you mentioned, because that's always, you ever had a conversation, Jess, with the practice about not talking about HIPAA? It's pretty hard to do, right? So they're asking about the attendance prediction and the live interpreters, all those things. Those are also HIPAA compliant? 100%
HIPAA compliant.
Excellent. And the final question we have before we wrap up here is, the question is, us administrators, it's hard work serving new patients and makes it very challenging. What's the best way to expand telehealth services? And it says here with current resources. So I'm assuming there they mean, the same number of providers, same number of people.
Yeah, automate. So what I often see with telehealth is, again, it's just a point solution. So it's all of a sudden on administrators to figure out, how do we get this out there to our patients, to the appointments that we have? How do we tell them, how to download, what the instructions, the access, everything else? And that is a huge headache to figure out from a process perspective, but also from a time and resource perspective. Someone has to do that work. Someone has to spend their time doing it when it could be spent elsewhere. So if you automate and streamline that process to, like I was saying before, to speak with your EHR where you're already doing part of your process today, then everything else becomes easier and actually allows you to continue doing your work and scale this and get it bigger without necessarily having to scale your resources as well, which is really, really, really important.
Outstanding. Let's see, it looks like that's all we have for today. So again, we will be providing a recording and slides. Jess, great job, super knowledgeable, fun working with you. Hope we get to do this again soon. Thank you everyone for joining us. Take care.
Thank you so much. This is great.